They didn't even whisper it behind closed doors anymore. By the time Marcus Johnson walked into the school cafeteria wearing that tiny rainbow pin on his denim jacket, the whole town had decided his family was a problem. Not because they were black, that had always simmered in the background, unspoken but sharp, but because their boy had the nerve to sit with the LGBT club after school. That single act cracked something wide open, and suddenly his parents' faces were no longer welcome in the church pews, the grocery store line, or the town hall meetings. His mother, Laverne, learned it the hard way the next Sunday. She had ironed her best dress, packed her Bible, and walked with her daughter Naomi beside her. The usher looked at her the way you might look at a stranger stealing a seat. "Ma'am," he said coldly, "maybe it's best your family worships at home." The words were dipped in sugar but sharp enough to slice her dignity in two. She held her head high, though Naomi saw her mother's lip tremble as they turned back down the steps of the church. The Johnsons were not wealthy, not influential, and not loud. They were ordinary. Robert Johnson, the father, worked 12-hour shifts at the auto shop, his hands calloused and cracked, his body aching from years of carrying other people's broken machines. Laverne stitched clothes in the evenings, saving every penny for her children's future. They lived in a weathered 2-bedroom house on the edge of town, a place that smelled faintly of wood smoke and fried chicken, where the laughter of children once poured out onto the street. But lately, silence had grown heavy in those rooms. The phone stopped ringing. Invitations stopped coming. Even Robert's boss hinted, not so subtly, that customers might feel more comfortable if he kept his private life in check. All because Marcus, at 15, had chosen honesty over fear. That night, Marcus sat in his room staring at the ceiling. The rainbow pin glinted faintly on his nightstand. He could still hear the jeers from the cafeteria boys barking slurs, girls sneering like he had betrayed them by existing. He had felt both invisible and exposed, like the whole world could see right through his skin to something they hated but couldn't name. His chest burned with shame he didn't deserve. Yet when he closed his eyes, he remembered the moment in the LGBT club, when a girl with short hair had smiled at him and said, "Welcome." That one word had been enough to carry him through. "Marcus." Robert's voice came from the hallway, steady but rough. The door opened, and his father leaned against the frame, arms crossed. For a long moment he just watched his son, the boy he'd raised to ride bikes, to throw a ball, to read the stories of Malcolm X and Langston Hughes. "You know this is going to be hard," Robert said finally. His tone was not cruel, not disappointed, just real. "Harder than it should be." Marcus swallowed. "I didn't mean for everyone to hate us." Robert stepped inside, sat on the edge of the bed. His weight sank the mattress, tilting Marcus toward him. "Listen, the world's always been quick to hate us for who we are. Now they found another excuse. But Sondant, you dare apologize for existing." His hand, rough and warm, squeezed Marcus's shoulder. "We'll get through this. Together." Down the hall, Laverne sat at the kitchen table with unpaid bills spread like storm clouds before her. She pressed her palms to her eyes. The electric company had already sent a warning. The pantry was thinning. And now, with neighbors pulling away, even borrowing sugar felt impossible. She prayed, quietly, that God hadn't abandoned them, even if his followers had. The following week, the school hosted its monthly parent-teacher night. Laverne and Robert showed up, hoping to hear about Naomi's grades and Marcus's classes. Instead, they found cold stares. Parents formed clusters, whispering and pointing. Teachers shifted uncomfortably. When it was their turn to speak with Marcus's homeroom teacher, she cleared her throat, eyes darting anywhere but at them. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson," she began, "perhaps it would be best if Marcus took a step back from extracurricular activities. It's causing a distraction." Robert's jaw clenched. "You mean the LGBT club?" he said flatly. The teacher winced, lowering her gaze. "We just want what's best for the school environment." "What's best for the school environment?" Robert repeated slowly. "Or what's easiest for you?" He stood so suddenly his chair scraped the floor. Laverne touched his arm, but his anger was too hot, too righteous. "Our son has the right to learn, to live, to breathe, And you want him invisible. His voice carried across the room, drawing even more glares. Well, he won't be invisible. Not in our home. Not in our hearts. That night, word spread like wildfire. Robert Johnson had made a scene. By morning, his boss called him into the office. Rob, you know I respect you, but folks around here are talking. If this keeps up, I might have to cut your hours. Respect, in that man's mouth, sounded like pity wrapped in threat. Robert drove home with his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He parked outside the house and just sat there, staring at the peeling paint, the sagging porch, the place that was all he could offer his family. Inside, he could hear Naomi giggling as Laverne read aloud from a library book. That sound softened his chest. It reminded him why he fought. Marcus came to the door and stood on the porch, watching his father silently. Finally, he asked, "Did I ruin everything?" His voice cracked. Robert looked at him, then pulled him into a fierce embrace. "No, son. You gave us something to fight for." The days that followed were not easy. The Johnsons stopped attending town events. At the grocery store, people moved their carts away. The local pastor mentioned sins of pride in a sermon everyone knew was about them. Even Naomi, just 12, found herself alone at recess, her friends slipping away as if her family's love was contagious. Yet inside that small house, something remarkable was happening. Meals became longer, filled with conversation and laughter. They prayed together more honestly, not for the world's approval but for strength. Laverne began turning scraps of fabric into quilts that wrapped her children in warmth. Robert built a makeshift bookshelf and filled it with stories of heroes who faced impossible odds. Marcus, shy as he was, started sketching designs in his notebook, dreams of a future where he could be both black and gay and free. One evening, a knock came at the door. The Johnsons exchanged wary glances. Robert opened it cautiously. On the porch stood a woman in her 30s, holding a casserole dish. She looked nervous. "Two heard what they've been saying," she stammered. "I just wanted to let you know. Not everyone agrees." She placed the dish in Robert's hands and hurried away before he could respond. It wasn't much, but it was enough to spark hope. Marcus took the casserole dish from his father, the steam fogging his glasses. "Maybe we're not as alone as we think," he whispered. Robert nodded slowly. Maybe. But as the weeks turned into months, the pressure only grew. Bills piled higher. Hours at work were cut. The school board scheduled a meeting to discuss appropriate clubs. Rumors swirled that the LGBT group would be disbanded. And through it all, Marcus felt the weight of being the cause. The guilt gnawed at him, even as his family reassured him. He wondered if it might have been easier to keep silent, to hide, to blend. Yet every time he looked at his sister, who now walked taller beside him, or his mother, who hummed hymns while sewing despite exhaustion, or his father, who carried dignity like armor, Marcus knew. Silence was not survival. Silence was surrender, and he wasn't ready to surrender. The night of the school board meeting arrived like a storm everyone had seen brewing, but no one could stop. The Johnson family walked into the auditorium together, Marcus clutching his notebook tight against his chest, Naomi holding her mother's hand. Rows of parents and teachers sat stiff in the metal chairs, murmuring like bees in a hive. At the front of the room, the board members shuffled papers, their faces already decided before the first word was spoken. Robert leaned close to his son. "Keep your head up. No matter what they say, you keep your head up." Marcus nodded, though his stomach twisted into knots. The meeting began with small talk about budget cuts and playground repairs. Then the board chair cleared his throat. Next item on the agenda, extracurricular activities. Specifically, the recent controversy surrounding the student LGBT group. His voice carried a chill, as if he were announcing a crime. A mother in the crowd stood first. "This group is inappropriate. It's confusing our children." She glanced pointedly toward Marcus. "It goes against the values of this community." Laverne's grip tightened around Naomi's hand. She wanted to scream that values meant nothing without compassion, but her voice caught in her throat. Another parent rose. "And it's not just about the club. Some families here are bringing that lifestyle into our schools, parading it in front of others. It's disruptive. Marcus's cheeks burned. He wanted to disappear, but then he felt his father's hand on his shoulder, grounding him. Robert stood. "Excuse me," he said, his voice steady but loud enough to cut through the whispers. "My son has every right to learn, just like your children. He has every right to gather with friends who accept him. You call it disruptive. I call it survival." The room erupted, some clapping, some shouting. The board chair banged his gavel. "Order! Order!" A teacher in the back spoke softly but firmly. "I've seen these students support one another in ways we adults should envy. They're not disrupting theory healing." For a brief moment, Marcus's heart lifted, but the board chair leaned into his microphone. "We appreciate all perspectives. However, given the growing concerns, we vote to suspend the LGBT club until further notice." The gavel struck. Just like that, it was gone. Marcus's chest hollowed. Naomi whispered, "That's not fair." Her eyes shimmered with anger and confusion. Robert wrapped an arm around both children and guided them toward the exit. "We're not finished," he muttered under his breath. "They think a gavel ends this? They don't know us." Outside, the cool night air wrapped around them. Marcus blinked back tears. "I shouldn't have joined. I ruined everything." "No," Robert said fiercely, turning to face him. "You gave us truth. Truth doesn't ruin, it reveals." His eyes glistened in the streetlight. "And now we know who stands with us, and who hides behind fear." At home, Laverne lit a single candle on the table. They sat in silence, the flame flickering like fragile hope. Finally, she spoke. "If they close the doors, we'll build our own. If they silence us, we'll sing louder. We've been here before you as a people, as a family. We don't give up." That night, Marcus dreamed of walls closing in on him, only for his family's voices to break them down. When he woke, he knew they would have to fight differently now. In the following days, whispers turned into open hostility. Someone spray-painted slurs on their fence. A note was shoved into their mailbox. "Leave before you poison our town." Robert repainted the fence, his hands shaking with both rage and determination. Laverne burned the note in the sink, watching the ashes curl. But for every act of hate, there were glimmers of resistance. The woman who had once brought them a casserole returned, this time with her husband, carrying grocery bags. "We want you to know we're here," she said quietly. Naomi's eyes widened when she saw oranges and cereal boxes tumble onto their counter, luxuries they hadn't had in weeks. Soon, 2 students from the disbanded LGBT club showed up on their porch. One boy had bruises on his arms. The other carried a stack of rainbow-colored posters. "We heard what happened at the meeting," they said. "Can we meet here instead? We don't have anywhere else." Robert looked at Marcus, then at Laverne. The decision was unspoken but unanimous. "This house," Robert said firmly, "is open." And so, the Johnson home became something more than a shelter. Every Friday, kids would trickle in, shy at first, carrying notebooks, guitars, sketchpads. They would cram into the living room, voices tentative then rising together. Some came out for the first time. Some simply sat in silence, soaking in the rare feeling of safety. Laverne would cook what little she could, stretching beans and rice into feasts. Naomi would pass out paper for poems and drawings. One night, Marcus stood up, trembling. "I thought I ruined my family by being myself," he confessed. "But now I see. Maybe I saved us." The room erupted in applause, kids clapping until his cheeks flushed. He sat down, heart pounding with something he hadn't felt in months. Pride. But the more their house filled with light, the more the outside world seethed. Rumors spread about meetings of sin happening at the Johnson home. Robert's hours were cut again. Laverne's sewing clients stopped calling. Bills piled higher, threatening to crush them. One evening, as Robert sifted through the stack of overdue notices, Marcus placed a hand on the table. "What if we tell our story?" Robert frowned. "What do you mean?" "Not just to each other. To everyone. Online. videos, posts, whatever. If they want us silent, maybe the best thing we can do is speak louder. The idea terrified them. Exposure could bring more hate, but it could also bring allies. Laverne studied her son's determined face. If we do this, we do it together. And so they began. Marcus recorded a video on his phone, sitting in their living room. His voice shook at first, but grew steady. My name is Marcus Johnson. I'm 15. I'm black. I'm gay. And because I joined the LGBT club at school, my family has been shunned. But we are still here. We are still strong. And we will not disappear. Naomi uploaded it. They waited. For a day, nothing happened. Then the views climbed. Comments poured in. Some were cruel, spitting venom. But many more were messages of solidarity. You're not alone. We see you. Stay strong. News outlets picked it up. A journalist drove out to their house, sat at their worn kitchen table and listened. Soon, their story spread across the state. Strangers mailed letters of encouragement. Donations trickled in, enough to keep the lights on. But with visibility came danger. One night, rocks shattered their front window. Marcus dove to the floor, heart racing. Robert charged outside but found only darkness and laughter fading down the street. He returned inside, holding his trembling son. They can break glass, he growled. But not us. The next Sunday, a small group of people gathered on their lawn, neighbors, students, even the woman from church who had once turned them away. They held signs. Love makes us strong. Hate makes us weak. The Johnsons watched from the porch, stunned. Laverne's eyes filled with tears. We're not alone anymore, she whispered. Marcus stepped forward, standing on the porch with the rainbow pin gleaming on his jacket. For the first time, he looked out at the world not with fear, but with defiance. The boy who once thought he ruined everything now realized. He had started a movement. Yet, in the shadows, opposition brewed. The pastor thundered from the pulpit, warning of corruption. The school board considered disciplinary action. Robert's boss hinted that his job might not last much longer. The Johnsons knew the storm was far from over. But as the sun dipped low that evening, casting golden light across their battered but unbroken home, they felt something stronger than fear, resolve. For no matter what came next, they had already built their fortress not of wood and stone, but of love unyielding. The knock on the door came just past midnight. Robert was the first to wake, his body trained by years of hard labor and restless nights. He slid out of bed, careful not to wake Laverne, though she stirred anyway. Another knock, louder this time. He grabbed the baseball bat he kept by the door and opened it cautiously. 2 police officers stood under the porch light, their faces unreadable. One held a clipboard. Mr. Johnson, we've had complaints about large gatherings at this residence. Noise, disturbances. Some folks are saying it's becoming a public nuisance. Robert tightened his grip on the bat. My children and their friends meet here. They're safe here. That's all. The taller officer cleared his throat. Sir, just a warning. Keep it down. Otherwise, we'll have to take further action. Robert met his gaze without flinching. You want me to tell a group of kids they're too loud for existing? You want me to break their hearts so this town can sleep easier? No, not tonight. He closed the door before they could respond. Inside, Marcus stood in the hallway, eyes wide. They're trying to shut us down. Robert put a hand on his shoulder. Let them try. We'll be louder. But the harassment escalated. The next morning, someone had dumped garbage across their yard. A week later, Naomi's bicycle was stolen from the porch. At school, Marcus found a crude drawing taped to his locker. A stick figure hanging from a rope with the words "Go back where you came from." He tore it down with trembling hands, but the image burned into his mind. That night, he sat at the kitchen table long after everyone else went to bed. His sketchbook lay open, but instead of his usual drawings of houses and cities, his pencil traced angry, jagged lines across the page. Laverne came in quietly, her robe wrapped tight around her. She set a mug of cocoa in front of him. Baby, she whispered, brushing his curls back from his forehead. Don't let their hate build a home inside you. Use it for something else. Build with it. Marcus looked up, his eyes wet. How, Mama? How do I build when they keep tearing everything down? Brick by brick, she said. And with love stronger than they've ever known. He didn't believe it that night, but her words planted a seed. Meanwhile, the video Marcus had posted kept spreading. LGBTQ+ organizations reached out, offering support. One invited the family to speak at a rally in the city. Robert hesitated at first, the feared leaving their fragile safety behind, but Marcus was insistent. We have to show them. We're not just victims. We're fighters. The rally was unlike anything they had ever seen. Hundreds of people filled the streets, rainbow flags waving in the breeze, chants echoing off the buildings. For once, Marcus was surrounded not by hate but by belonging. When it was his turn to speak, he stepped onto the makeshift stage, his heart pounding. My name is Marcus Johnson, he began, voice cracking through the microphone. Where I come from, they told me my family didn't belong. They told me being black and being gay was too much for this town to handle. But my family taught me love doesn't need permission. Love makes us unbreakable. The crowd erupted, cheers washing over him like sunlight. For the first time, Marcus believed his voice could carry beyond the walls of his small town. But back home, their stand came at a cost. Robert's boss finally fired him, citing declining business. Laverne lost her largest client. The family's finances collapsed. The refrigerator emptied, the bills stacked higher. At night, Robert lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling, wondering how he could protect his children from a world that seemed determined to crush them. One evening, as he sat at the table surrounded by overdue notices, Naomi climbed onto his lap. She was small but fierce, her eyes steady. Daddy, she whispered, we're still rich. We've got us. Tears stung his eyes. Out of the mouths of babes came truths stronger than sermons. The family leaned harder on their community of outcasts. The LGBT kids brought groceries from their part-time jobs. The supportive neighbors slipped envelopes under their door. And slowly, their home transformed into a sanctuary not just for themselves, but for anyone who needed a place to breathe. Still, the hatred outside didn't quiet. The pastor organized a petition to ban unwholesome gatherings. The school threatened Marcus with suspension for disruptive behavior after he refused to remove his rainbow pin. And one night, a group of men in trucks circled their block, engines growling like predators. Inside, Marcus huddled with Naomi on the couch. Laverne whispered prayers, her voice trembling. Robert stood at the window with the bat, rage and fear churning inside him. When the trucks finally sped away, leaving tire marks like scars on the street, Robert sank into a chair, exhausted. They want us scared, he said bitterly. They want us quiet. Laverne took his hand. Then we'll be louder, louder with love, louder with truth. But Marcus was tired. The weight of being the reason his family suffered pressed down until he could barely breathe. One night, he slipped out of the house, walking aimlessly through the dark streets. He ended up at the edge of town, staring at the railroad tracks, wondering if maybe the world would be easier without him. A voice broke through the night. Marcus. It was Jamal, one of the boys from the LGBT group. He jogged up, panting. Man, don't scare me like that. What are you doing out here? Marcus shrugged, unable to speak. Jamal placed a hand on his shoulder. You think you're the reason all this is happening, but you're the reason we're still standing. If you quit, what happens to the rest of us? The words hit like lightning. Marcus realized he wasn't just carrying his own story, he was carrying everyone's. He wasn't a burden. He was a beacon. He went home that night, hugged his parents tight, and whispered, I'm not going anywhere. The next day, he wrote an essay for English class titled Fortresses Made of Love. It was raw, unpolished, but powerful. His teacher, moved to tears, secretly submitted it to a statewide contest. Weeks later, Marcus received a letter. He had won first prize. His essay would be published. When the announcement came, the town couldn't ignore it. Newspapers called. The local TV station wanted an interview. Suddenly, The boy they tried to erase was on every screen. And in his essay, he didn't just tell his truth told theirs. He wrote about a town that turned its back, about a church that forgot compassion, about neighbors who chose silence over solidarity. The backlash was immediate. The pastor denounced him from the pulpit. Parents demanded the school distance itself. But the spotlight couldn't be dimmed. And for every hateful voice, there were dozens more lifting him up, praising his courage. The Johnson home, once isolated, now buzzed with support from across the country. Letters arrived daily. Donations poured in. Someone even started a petition to reinstate the LGBT club at school, gaining thousands of signatures. But the true battle was not with petitions or donations. It was in the hearts of those who had once slammed doors. And slowly cracks appeared in their armor. One afternoon, as Laverne hung laundry on the line, the church usher who had once turned her away walked up. He shuffled awkwardly, hat in hand. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "I was wrong. We were wrong. Can we start again?" Laverne studied him, years of hurt in her eyes. Finally, she nodded. "Start again. But don't just come for me. Come for my son." At school, Naomi's former friends began sitting with her again, ashamed of how they'd abandoned her. Teachers started pushing back against the board. And Marcus, still afraid, still scarred, began to believe he might have a future beyond survival. But the story wasn't finished. The real test was still coming, one that would force the Johnsons to decide whether to keep standing tall or risk being broken once more. The test came faster than anyone expected. On a gray Tuesday morning, Marcus arrived at school to find the principal waiting outside the building with 2 security guards. Students slowed as they passed, whispering. "Marcus Johnson," the principal said, his voice clipped. "You're suspended for 2 weeks. Disruptive behavior, insubordination, wearing political symbols against school policy." His eyes flicked to the rainbow pin on Marcus's jacket. Marcus's heart plummeted. "But that's not—" "Take it up with the board," the principal snapped, already turning away. By the time Marcus got home, Robert was pacing the living room, fists clenched. "Suspended? For a pin? For breathing?" His voice shook with fury. "This is it. We take them to court." Laverne touched his arm, grounding him. "Court takes money we don't have. But we can't stay quiet either." So they reached out to lawyers, to journalists, to activists who had once marched with banners bigger than the hate they faced now. And slowly, something powerful began to take shape. A case not just for Marcus, but for every child silenced for existing. In the weeks that followed, the Johnson house turned into a war room. Volunteers stuffed envelopes. Students painted signs. Lawyers drafted arguments late into the night at their kitchen table. Marcus, though terrified, stood at the center of it all. The boy who had once wanted to vanish, now refusing to bow. The trial date came in early spring. The courthouse steps swarmed with protesters and supporters, rainbow flags clashing with hateful placards. Inside, the air buzzed with tension. Marcus sat between his parents, his hands trembling. He looked around the courtroom, teachers, neighbors, even classmates who had once mocked him. For the first time, they would all hear his voice. The opposing lawyer painted a picture of disruption, of a school forced into chaos by one boy's defiance. But when Marcus's turn came, he stood tall. "I wore a pin," he said simply, his voice echoing through the chamber. A small pin, but to them it was too big to bear. They didn't see a boy who wanted to belong. They saw a threat. "But I am not a threat. I am a student. I am a son. I am black. I am gay. And I am not going away." Silence followed, heavy and unbroken, until Robert reached out and squeezed his son's shoulder with quiet pride. The judge ruled days later. The suspension was unconstitutional. Marcus had the right to wear his pin, the right to his voice, the right to exist. The school was ordered to reinstate the LGBT club. The town split in two. Some muttered darkly about courts meddling in tradition, but others, many more than before, began to soften. The Johnsons had not crumbled under pressure. They had risen, and the world had taken notice. When Marcus returned to school, students lined the hallway. Some clapped. Some simply stepped aside, eyes lowered in apology. Naomi ran to him after class, breathless. "Marcus, they're talking about you like you're a hero." He shook his head. "Not a hero, just a boy who got tired of hiding." But the truth was bigger than him. The LGBT club returned, larger than before. Teachers who once stayed silent now spoke openly about inclusion. Even the pastor, faced with dwindling pews, softened his sermons, though his pride kept him from apology. At home, the Johnsons gathered in their small living room. The walls were still cracked, the bills still heavy, but their house pulsed with something stronger than poverty. Purpose. Robert raised his glass of sweet tea. "To survival," he said. "No," Marcus corrected gently. "To living." Laverne smiled, tears brimming. "To love." And Naomi, grinning wide, added, "To us." They clinked glasses, laughter spilling into the night. Months later, Marcus's essay Fortresses Made of Love was selected for a national anthology. An invitation arrived for him to read it in Washington, D.C. The whole family boarded a bus for the first time in years, their clothes simple but their spirits radiant. When Marcus stepped onto the stage in the Grand Hall, lights shining down, he thought of the boy he had once been afraid, ashamed, certain he had ruined everything. Now, looking out at the sea of faces, he knew the truth. He had sparked something that could not be contained. He read with steady voice, "They tried to tear us apart, but in our small house, we found a fortress made of love. And from that fortress, we will keep building a world where no child is told they are too much to belong." The audience rose to its feet. Applause thundered. And for a moment, Marcus felt as if the very air glowed gold around him, warm and unbreakable. Back home, their town was still divided. Hate did not vanish overnight, but neither did hope. And in the Johnsons' little house with peeling paint and cracked windows, light kept spilling out Friday nights with kids laughing, afternoons with neighbors dropping by, mornings with Robert heading to a new job offered by someone who admired his courage. They had not been erased. They had not been broken. They had turned their exile into a fortress, their pain into power, their love into a banner brighter than any hatred. And though the road ahead stretched long and uncertain, the Johnsons knew one thing with certainty. Together, they were unshakable. As the sun dipped behind the horizon one quiet evening, Marcus sat on the porch steps, notebook in hand, rainbow pin gleaming. He looked up at the sky, a soft wash of gold and violet. Naomi leaned against him, humming. Their parents talked quietly inside, voices low and steady. For the first time in a long time, Marcus didn't feel small. He felt infinite. The world had tried to push them into shadows, but together they had stepped into the light. And though the story of the Johnsons was far from over, it ended here on this night, in this glow with a truth no one could take away. Love was their fortress, and inside it they were free. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.